This story takes place about 30 years ago. My parents had moved in with one another in a house that had belonged to my grandparents. It was a 2-story house with a nice garden in the front and a small creek in the back. It needed a lot of renovating, and my dad took on the job, ripping up floors and tearing out old cabinets. My mom worked days mostly, so she really only saw my dad at night. On this day, my dad had been working on painting one of the back rooms on the ground floor. He had been working on it for a few hours while listening to the radio when he heard a thump come from the upstairs floor. He didn't think anything of it at first because, again, like I said, it was an old house, and usually old houses creaked and groaned, so he went on painting. A couple minutes later, he heard another thump, louder than the first. He turned his radio off and listened. Nothing came after it, but he sat longer, waiting to hear something else. From what he told me, he waited a good 5 minutes before he heard loud footsteps pound against the ceiling. He could see dust slightly falling from the ceiling as they pounded across the floor. He was panicking now, because he knew that nobody else had been in the house but him. My mom had left for work earlier that morning, and the only one who had a key was my dad. He knew there was no way anybody could get in. The upstairs windows were too high up for anyone to crawl in without crawling on the roof, and there was no sign of a break-in on the bottom floor. He had surveyed the house before going to paint. He picked up a hammer from his toolbox and slowly made his way to the top floor, ducking behind corners as he went in case anyone was there. Everything seemed deathly quiet and still, which made it even more scary to him. Because he was just waiting for someone to pop out, but he found no one. It scared him pretty bad, and he called my grandma that evening, telling her everything that happened. She didn't sound surprised at all, and told him that when her and my grandfather had first moved in and started renovating the house, that they had a similar experience. Coincidentally, they had recently moved into the house and had been there for about a month. My grandfather was standing on the ladder that leads up into the attic access. The light had cut on its own, and my grandfather went up to inspect it, confused because it was a pull switch. While he was telling my grandma that he didn't understand how it cut on, my grandmother was at the bottom of the ladder, staring up at him when she felt heavy footsteps run full speed at her. She screamed and tried running down the hall, slamming into the ladder and almost making my granddad fall. They were both pretty shaken up after, and with no explanation chalked it up to them both being tired. They figured it out later that something really only happened if they were trying to do some sort of renovations, so they stopped completely. But since my father had already started, he tried finishing up as quickly as possible, even speaking to whoever or whatever it was, saying that after he finished what he already started, that he wouldn't do anything else with the house, getting friends and some of my uncles to even help. After the final renovations, my dad never had another experience again. I always stayed up a little too late on school nights when I was younger. Not because of games or that last episode I wanted to binge, but books. I've always loved books, and on this night I'd just finished one. It was an old Goosebumps book I'd found in my school's library, one that'd been doodled in, and it had a cracked spine and yellow pages, but that never mattered much to me. I've always liked creepy things, even when they bothered me, and I was especially paranoid. So when I climbed into bed with heavy eyes, I found myself curled up beside my mother, bundled in a ball under her blanket, and she didn't happen to mind because she was too tired, and I was maybe more frightened than I'd have liked to admit. Either way, her presence made me feel better enough to nod off. I woke up one time, maybe two, and in the middle of the night found myself too scared to sleep, but too anxious to stay awake. So I rolled on my side, with my knees tight against my chest, with my eyes squeezed shut. The room was dim, and the only light I could find flickered from 2 clocks on either side of the room, the old digital ones with blinking red numbers and blaring alarms. It unsettled me, the red lights, and so I grabbed a pillow and pressed it over the side of my head. and that helped a bit since my view was too limited to conjure anything or find any concern my brain could create. But as I was ready enough to sleep, I saw it, and with my blurry vision I couldn't tell what it was. Its silhouette was dark, and its eyes were red. Its frame was short and unsightly, lean and skinny. Almost too skinny. In the moments that I had to think, I could identify its figure as one that was similar to a monkey's, and it stood on my mother's dresser across the room, and then swung itself from place to place until it landed directly in front of me. The feeling I had when I heard it land, when it opened its eyes wide and stared at me, is one I can't truly describe. But in the midst of my chest, I felt this intense pulling, like my heart was falling into my knees, and the air had caught in my lungs. It felt evil, and as it glared at me, the room would rumble and shake. I would mumble out of fear and panic, crying and huffing just loud enough to wake my mother. "What's wrong?" she shouted. And suddenly, as if by hearing her voice and having her panicked arms wrapped around me, it made everything stop. There was no creature, and the room was as still as stone. I didn't answer her, but I mumbled. I rolled into her with teary eyes, and she scolded me with narrowed eyes, saying, "Quit reading all those scary books." My story takes place a couple years back when my brother still lived with my parents and I. I was knocked out of sleep when I heard a loud knocking on my bedroom door. I sat up, still groggy, and stared at my door. Then I heard what sounded like my brother's voice say, "Hey Dallas, come open the door for me." There was something in the tone and inflection of the question that sounded off. One, my brother never stayed up that late. And two, he never asked to come in my room. He would just barge in. I didn't trust it, so I stayed in the bed, my eyes glued to the door. "Come on, man, open the door. I need to tell you something." I slowly crawled out of the bed and moved slowly towards the door, looking underneath to see if I could see a shadow of someone standing there, but I saw nothing.
"Dallas,"
it said as I heard it lightly tapping against the door. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do, so I ran back to my bed, pushing myself back against the wall, trying to put as much space between me and the door and whatever was out there. I sat and waited what felt like hours, but probably was only a few minutes. I hadn't heard anything for some time until I heard footsteps coming down the hall. I thought that whatever it was had come back until I saw my mom's head peek around the door. "Who were you talking to just now?" But before I could answer, I heard my brother open his door from down the hall. He stepped out, rubbing his eyes, and said, "Were you just at my door just now, bro? And why the fuck were you talking like that?" "No," I said. "I thought you were at mine. I've been in my room this entire time." "That's crazy," my mom said, "but I think we all just need to go back to bed. I think we're all too tired for this." I walked back into my room, closing and locking the door, and stayed up after, watching videos on my phone. I was too shaken to sleep. Till this day, I wonder what would have happened to me if I would have opened that door. I've always had trouble sleeping, even when I was a kid. It's gotten a lot better now, but I usually have to take a sleeping pill to get me to sleep through the night. I was still living with my parents at the time, and I had just started using sleeping pills. This particular night, I had taken one and was sleeping pretty peacefully when I woke up suddenly. I could see my room clearly, but I couldn't move. I knew it was sleep paralysis, so I tried not to panic, hoping that it would eventually pass. I felt my anxiety begin to build in my chest, and my eyes shifted to the right of me. Sitting on my chest was me, or what appeared to be me. I was facing the wall and banging on it, my mouth open in a scream, but I couldn't hear anything. Truthfully, I didn't understand what I was seeing. but I began to hyperventilate. How could I see myself in a state that I wasn't physically in? I was trying my best to scream or make some type of noise, and I could still see myself banging on the wall. When I was able to get half a yell out, I heard someone yell my name, and I tried yelling again, this time a little louder. My door swung open and the light flicked on to show my father standing over me. He asked if I was all right, and I shook my head yes, grasping my chest as I asked him between gasps if he heard me screaming or banging on the wall, but he said no. The only sound he heard were the 2 times I yelled. I had a pretty hard time after that going to sleep even more, in fear that it would happen again. But it never did. I've had sleep paralysis after, but I haven't seen anything since.